If you're listening to this right now, if you're hearing my voice as clearly as any other, well, I've got some bad news for you. You're currently living in a doomed timeline. Confused? Yeah, I don't blame you. But trust me, the news is twice as worse for me. How do I know this, you might wonder? Well, why should you or anyone trust some random voice on the internet? Believe me, I totally get that. I would be skeptical too. I know it's not unusual, hearing someone claim we're all doomed and the end is near. But I promise, this isn't the ramblings of some cult leader or troll. This is very real. You see, I'm not exactly normal, if that word has any meaning at this point. Whereas most people wake up, go to work, fall asleep, and wake up again in the same timeline, my mind works a bit differently. I can actually fall asleep on my couch one afternoon and wake up the next day in my bed, ending in the same exact body, but in a completely different timeline. It may sound like a superpower, but trust me, it's not. It's a pain in the ass on a good day, and an outright curse at worst. But I'm not the only one who has this either. Apparently, my family comes from a long line of timeline hoppers, as we call ourselves. Going back to my most distant ancestors, we've been dealing with this for centuries, waking up in various timelines, often with little warning. Think of any famous battle or historical event. Chances are my family have witnessed that event play out in any number of ways, some more terrifying than others. My great-grandfather saw World War I play out a dozen different ways, including one where it never happened. And my grandfather saw World War II play out in hundreds of different ways, including a few where the world pretty much ended. My father saw Vietnam, the Cold War, and Iraq play out differently, often with small but critical variations. As for me personally, I've seen timelines that'll make you sick to your stomach or green with envy. There's this one timeline where 9/11 never happened. God, I miss that timeline. Things were still messy, but nowhere near as bad as they are in this timeline. There's also another where China went back to communism and started a new Cold War. I really don't miss that one. There's even this one timeline where boy bands never happened, and that was the only real difference. Not saying that was a good timeline, but it helps illustrate just how subtle the variations can be. What makes it so frustrating on our part is that we rarely have control over which timeline we end up in. It's not totally random. We can kind of sense the flow of things the same way most people sense potential danger. My father often likened it to planning around the weather. Even when we have a detailed forecast, we're rarely sure how it'll play out. Now, I've had this little quirk since I was a kid. My parents have it too, and so do two of my uncles, my 4 aunts, and my older brother. We all have to help each other whenever it happens, because when we end up in a new timeline, there's a chance that friends and associates don't remember or recognize us. Things rarely deviate that much, but it has happened a handful of times throughout my life. Again, it's a real pain in the ass. I had some really good friends in some timelines, friends I really didn't want to lose. Then, certain life events and world events converge, and without warning, I wake up in a new timeline. Doesn't always happen when I go to sleep, doesn't always happen when I pass out or anything like that. Sometimes I'll just get this random headache out of nowhere, I get dizzy and disoriented, I'll black out for a moment, and the next thing you know, I'm in a new timeline. I'm still in the same place, and I look exactly the same as I did before. I just have to figure out what makes this new timeline different, and adjust my life accordingly. I wish I could say you get used to it. Even with my family supporting me and helping me every step of the way, I'll never say it's easy. I'll never say it makes you stronger either. Not anymore. But I genuinely thought I had a grasp on it. I really did think I could navigate all these messy timelines, at least to a point where it was manageable. But that all changed 2 weeks ago. It started shortly after I woke up in this particular timeline. I was living with my older brother at the time. We were sharing an apartment, as most everyone in our family does, knowing any real estate we buy could be gone in another timeline. But we thought we were ready for this. I mean, we dealt with it before. And before we even got dressed that morning, we connected with the rest of the family. We confirmed that they had woken up in the new timeline as well. And at first, it didn't seem like this one differed much from the last one we were in. The world map was the same. The presidents, prime ministers, dictators, and celebrities were the same. Even the last 25 World Series champions were the same. The only real difference, at least at first, was the war in Eastern Europe seemed to be going badly. I won't name the nations involved. That actually varies a lot between timelines, much more so than you think. But for the past couple of years, we've all seen things in that part of the world escalate. It's hardly the worst it's ever been, so we didn't think much of it. But then, my mother has this breakdown, if that's even the right word. One minute, we're all congregating outside a park to catch up on things in this new timeline, and the next, her eyes roll in the back of her head, she starts seizing, and she nearly chokes on her own tongue. I'd seen some scary things in many timelines, but I never experienced anything that scared me that much. Now, we usually don't like going to hospitals, but we had to make an exception this time. We managed to get my mother to a local ER, and they were able to stabilize her. But she was stuck in some coma, and the doctors had no idea why. And no, by the way, we don't tell them we're time hopping. We didn't need them committing us to a mental institution while this was going on. Now, my dad opted to stick with my mom, but the rest of the family tried to find answers. We start searching through the journals my grandparents, aunts, and uncles left, looking to see if this was anything other than an ordinary health ailment. And honestly, as upset as I was, I really did hope it was something mundane, something as ordinary as a seizure or a stroke. That we could handle. But what happened next, there was nothing ordinary about it, even by our standards. Because 2 days after my mother, my father had a similar episode. He was at the hospital when it happened, but it was even worse for him. The doctors were there and they were able to treat him. But before he passed out, they heard him say something disturbing.
Darkness. Fire. He's coming.
Then he fell into a coma, just like my mom. And he's been that way ever since. At that point, my whole family dropped whatever they were doing and met up at my brother's apartment. We all agreed this was something serious, something we'd never encountered before. And for us, that's legitimately concerning. Because when you've experienced so many timelines, your bar for what constitutes distressing is very high. So we knew we had to get to the bottom of this before anyone else was afflicted. As it turns out, we weren't fast enough. My two uncles felt it next. One minute, they were just sipping on their fourth cup of coffee. The next, they were on the floor, writhing and seizing. And just like my father, they said it.
Darkness. Fire. He's coming.
We got them to the ER. They stabilized just in time to fall into a coma. But before we even left the hospital, 3 of my aunts felt it too. And while the doctors were treating them, it hit my oldest aunt. But when she passed out, she said something else. Something that only added to the horror.
Darkness. Fire. He's coming. He's going to end it all. He's going to.
She passed out before she could say anything else. And after turning her over to the doctors, my brother and I looked at one another, as though we were waiting for the other to feel it too. But it never happened. We just stood there, in the middle of the ER at 1 a.m, waiting for it to strike. But it never came. As far as we knew, we were the last one standing. We both rushed home, stocking up on coffee and energy drinks in the process. And over the course of the next few days, we kept looking through our family journals, taking turns sleeping for a few hours at a time, and always waking each other up at specific intervals. It kept us sharp enough to stay focused. Even though we thought it was only a matter of time before we ended up in a coma too, we kept pushing forward. But eventually, we finally found something. It came in the form of an old journal entry from my great-great-grandfather. It described something similar to what we'd been seeing. And these were his exact words.
It all happened so fast. In the span of a fortnight, the entire family fell into a deep sleep. Mama and Uncle Earl kept trying to wake them up, but nothing worked. We thought they were all going to die. But then, Daddy came to briefly. Said something about darkness and fire. That something or someone was coming. I was so scared. I kept trying to go to sleep and wake up in a new world, like we always did. But that didn't happen this time. It was as though there were no other worlds to go to.
My older brother was sleeping at the time I found this. I was tempted to wake him. I thought this was just what we had looking for. Great-granddad experienced this too. But he clearly survived. But then I read the next page. And that's when my heart dropped right into my stomach.
This morning, the newspapers were abuzz. The Great War in Europe was over. Germany surrendered. That was good news. Minutes after reading that story, my whole family woke up. It was like a miracle. But Mama and Daddy didn't treat it like one. I just remember Daddy holding me close, rambling like a madman. He kept saying they stopped it just in time. They ended the war before it awoke. He never said what or who it was, just said it was ready to end us all, that we were about to run out of chances. And if it happened, there would be no escaping. Still don't know what he meant by that. I just know we woke up in another world the next day. Things finally settled. Life got back to normal. At least as normal as it can for us folk. But still, I keep wondering what it was. I just pray something like that never happens again. Because if Daddy was right, it won't be no miracle this time.
I felt seriously sick to my stomach after reading that. I dropped the book, fell out of my chair, and closed my eyes, hoping I'd wake up from this nightmare, or at least in a new timeline. But that didn't happen. I'm still here. My whole family's still here. And near as I can tell, we're stuck in this one timeline. And for all I know, it's the last timeline. The one in which it'll all come to an end. There are no more branches, no butterfly effects to change the course of history. I wonder whether it has to do with how history plays out, or with some other force that's been waiting, watching, and biding its time for this opportunity. According to my great-great-grandfather, World War I, one of the most devastating conflicts in history, was the last time this happened. But something stopped it. Maybe the war had to end a particular way. Maybe someone over in Europe did something that completely changed the course of time. I really have no idea, and I'm too tired to figure that out. But if my great-great-grandfather's words are anything to go by, it might already be too late. Whatever's out there, whatever or whoever will bring this fire and darkness, there's no stopping it. I know because less than an hour after reading that journal entry, I got a call from the hospital. My mother, my father, my aunts, they all passed away. No miracle, no sudden turn in their vitals. They all just died. I hadn't even let the nurse console me. I'm already too broken to shed any tears at this point. I then tried to wake my brother. At least he had a right to know. But I haven't been able to wake him. I've tried everything in my power. Cold water, yelling. even kicking him in the back. It doesn't work. He's gone, in a coma, just like everyone else was before they died. And that means I'm the only one left. I'm the last one standing. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm putting this message out there. I'm on my last legs. I can't stay awake for much longer. I know as soon as I fall asleep, I won't wake up. Not in this timeline, not in another timeline, nowhere at all. It's getting to a point where I'm starting to hallucinate. I swear, I'm seeing what they may have seen before they passed out. There's all this darkness and fire. It starts in what looks like Eastern Europe, but it's not caused by a man, an army, or a nation. This is something much more powerful. Something that's been waiting for this moment in time. This chance to finally end it all. I don't know how it'll play out. I just know it's coming. No one is safe. No one will be spared. This is it. This is the end. The last moments of the last timeline. Please, if you're listening to this, brace yourselves. Protect yourselves and all those you love before the darkness